Let's talk about Old School RuneScape's progression systems, specifically player resources, which I'm going to define as spells, equipment, locations, and abilities. In my eyes, none of these resources are required. You don't need to unlock any of the teleports, they just serve as a tool to better do some tasks. You are free to walk everywhere, but it helps if you can just pop in. In this same way, you don't need to get the best weapons in the game. You can also just get better at combat, spend more on food, or make your money elsewhere. The voluntary nature of this lets players create their own goals and routes through the game and makes players navigate what I'm going to be calling this pyramid of progression. Essentially, you have some goal at the top of the pyramid that you want to work towards. Say, get a wilderness boss pet to look super cool standing at the Grand Exchange. Problem is, you need to kill a lot of bosses to do that, and you can't. You are a level 1 in Lumbridge, so in fact you are pretty far away from ever doing that. In fact, you can't even start doing anything near that. Instead, you need to create this plan to get to the next closest step to where you want to be. In this example, you need to 1. Raise your combat skills, and 2. Get good gear. This forms the head of our pyramid of progression. So, how do you do that? Well, the next tier down might be questing, skilling, money making, or research. These tasks, too, will have their own sub-tiers, getting skills for the quest, making enough money to start faster earning, or learning the game well enough to understand that awesome OSRS video you are learning from and subscribe for. The player making this decision is some of the biggest fun that OSRS has to offer, charting your own way through the game. More importantly than that, though, is it starts to create these game loops that determine what a player might do in a given day. So my goal is to kill a boss. That's the greatest loop. I need to keep doing that until I get my pet. But to do that, I need to get good gear. And to do that, I need to make money. And to do that, I need to do quests. And to do that, I need to do low-level skilling. Sure, I want to kill bosses, but you can see how my best choice right now might be cutting willows in Draenor as my hour-to-hour task. This could be one player's path through the pyramid. Another player could take an entirely different approach, say gambling until he has enough gold. Essentially, the player is trying to find tasks now to move them from lower tiers of the pyramid up to the higher tier, with the more you do now, the easier it is to move up later. In many places, OSRS implements this very well. The whole description was from that game. However, in other cases, I feel like OSRS instead has a progression column. Instead of this branching pyramid or tree with several routes to a goal, we instead have 1 to 3 routes that you instead take all the way to the top, with old routes being consistently pruned due to inefficiency or obsolescence. Instead of extending the pyramid with new content that needs older content to overcome, OSRS often just removes the top, invalidates it, and puts a new head in its place. A great spot to see this is weapon metal progression. Clearly, the ability to wield increasingly stronger weapons was meant to be a progression in the game. You use your bronze sword to get strong enough to buy and wield the iron sword, and so on to steel. If your experience was like mine though, you probably got stuck around iron or steel, went and did some quests, or just grinded, and then you skipped all the way up to rune. Here's a progression system that ultimately doesn't really have a purpose for the main player, since other content will usually replace it in its entirety. And special note with this example, these game systems still hold an important place for Iron Man or accounts limited in their stats, so they aren't all bad. I would contrast this with, say, the Bones to Peaches spell. If you aren't aware, this is a spell you earn in the Mage Training Arena as an upgrade to Bones to Bananas. I like this progression because it is entirely optional. You don't need it for Slayer. And in fact, many people consider it never worth the time to do, and that's okay. But if you are struggling with Slayer, want to extend your trips, or are just looking for the absolute best rates possible, that optional resource is available. And due to its unique value, it isn't one that is likely to be made obsolete like a new weapon does to an old one. So you, the viewer, as a casual, hardcore, skiller, or PvPer, how do you like the progression systems in OSRS? Are you like myself, who prefers optional tangents that build up to create player power? Or do you prefer a more linear grind, something that's streamlined and it's to the point, the fastest route there, with older and unnecessary content becoming obsolete? I think there is something to be said for that. If I am only going to be using rune swords in the future, why add these extra steps in between if I can just shoot for the thing that I actually want? It just seems to me that every endgame activity just falls to just make more money. If I want to kill Vedion, instead of having this great story of all these quests that I did, my specific strategies that I learned, and these stories of these daring tales of risking this equipment, I instead get this story of I chopped wood for 1,000 hours until I bought all my best gear, did the best training methods, and then I didn't care if I died because it's only a small amount of my worth anyway. That's efficient, it works, but it isn't progression, it isn't a story, and it isn't a journey. It's just a grind, and then a reward that now feels like it really wasn't worth it.